will there be a superstar joining this team come training camp? I don't know, but it seems to be catching a lot. There seems to be a lot of smoke on the matter, and that's Patrick Kane of late has been a big topic of conversation. Obviously, we know that the Chicago Blackhawks are going to stink this year, and he's going into his final year of his contract. I mean, I suppose he could re-sign and just be like a legacy player and try and help the young kids through a rebuild, but I don't know if that's necessarily what he wants to do late in his career. Might want to go and play for a contender as opposed to a bottom feeder for so long. So it's likely that Patrick Kane will be dealt at some point. Now, a lot of us assumed, okay, sounds like maybe this could something that could happen through the summer, and perhaps it could happen rather soon. Although I was listening to Frank Saravalli of Daily Faceoff reporting on his podcast that it sounds as though Patrick Kane would prefer a trade deadline date as opposed to an offseason trade. Probably wants to just, see how the season goes and pinpoint exactly which team he believes he'd fit in best to try and win himself a Stanley Cup. Because if he's going to leave Chicago, it's probably to win a cup. And having, all of that big sample size to make your decision would bode well for him, I would assume. So he would like to do that. Whether or not that's actually going to happen, I don't know. Maybe a trade will come down today. Maybe a trade has come down by the time that this podcast reaches the people, and this whole conversation is going to be moot. Who knows? But at some point, the expectation is that Patrick Kane will be dealt. And Dave, Paul Bizanet, Biz Nasty, as most people know him as, was on the Spit and Chicklets podcast. I think it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before. And this is what he had to say about who he believes will be working really hard to get Patrick Kane on their team.
If you don't think Kyle Dubas is going to work his magic and get Patrick Kane over to the Toronto Maple Leafs, you're out of your mind. The rumblings have started, and people are talking about the cap space there as well. You're going to see one of the greatest, if not right now, as it stands, the greatest U.S. hockey player to ever play the game pass the torch over to Austin Matthews in his final couple seasons. I think it's going to happen. I think he's going to probably re-sign after the $10 million he's making and take a hometown discount, just like Giordano did, just like everybody else is doing.
Hometown discount. He's American.
How's that BC Bud Biz?
It's great. As in hometown, as in playing in Toronto and loving it so much and playing with his buddy. Austin.
Yeah. I got you. Did I catch a niner in
that? Because they need another $10 million contract. Yeah.
Well, Grinelli and Witt weren't having it. They weren't having it at all. But Dave, what are your thoughts on what Biz had to say about him really on board with Kyle Dubas getting it done and bringing in Patty Kane to Toronto?
We had a similar discussion not too long about the possibility of a Patrick Kane coming to Toronto. I think it was back when we did like a cosign no sign segment.
Yeah.
But when you start hearing some rumblings about teams being interested, I think Edmonton was a team that Saravalli had also put down. Like, you start to think that, yeah, first off, this is a deal that might be a little easier to get done at the trade deadline because teams will likely have a better idea of, okay, do we want to go all in for the rest of the season and go and get a player like Patrick? Because we know Patrick Kane isn't sticking around with Chicago past that trade deadline. It's just kind of going to be a given at that point. Unless the deals are just terrible and then they just tell Patrick Kane, like, there's no deal to be had here. Also very possible.
Yeah, it's interesting because he holds all the cards, right? Like, he's got a no movement clause, a no trade deal. So wherever he goes, Patrick Kane has full say in the team that he goes to. And, let's talk about Toronto as a viable option. I mean, there's a lot of reasons as to why Patrick Kane would sign off to come to Toronto. Austin Matthews should be case in point number one, first of all, to play with what could be, as Paul Bizanet said, like the next best American player in the game next to Patrick Kane. I mean, skill level wise, Austin Matthews is, but in terms of their career, Patrick Kane still holds the title right now. But to go link up with that kid in Toronto, I think that'd be awesome. And B, if you bring in Patty Kane, if you somehow are able to sign him to not a cheap contract, but a friendly-ish contract, that would probably bode well for trying to bring Austin Matthews back when that doomsday clock is ticking. You bring him in a good pal like Patrick Kane, an American friend. That might go well too. But also, it's a team that has Stanley Cup aspirations. And although it's, he said, Witt said, oh, he's American. He's from Buffalo. Toronto is the closest city in the NHL to Buffalo, outside of obviously the Sabres, which, I mean, probably doesn't want to go there because they're not going to win a Stanley Cup this season. So why bother? So it is extremely close in proximity to his hometown. It's basically is going back home or as close as you can get to without actually going to the Sabres. So there are a lot of reasons as to why Patrick Kane would actually be willing to go to Toronto, I believe. And I did hear Frank Saravalli also continued his reporting on Patrick Kane, saying that the Maple Leafs, they've checked in on the situation. They've checked in. Kyle Dubas has done his due diligence. He's checked in and said, hey, what would it take? Would he be interested in coming to Toronto? What's the situation there? Obviously, we don't, we're not flies on the wall. We don't know exactly how deep into conversation that went. But, the report is that they've checked in on the Kane situation. And if you're a Leaf fan, you at least got to be happy that this could potentially be a possibility because, I mean, Patrick Kane coming to this team would be electric. He had 90 points last year. Like, this guy's nowhere near, falling off by his standards. He's still going to be a superstar in the league for the next few seasons. And, I mean, we both believe that there's a very short window for this team. I mean, 2-ish years, kind of, I guess, if you put that doomsday clock for Austin Matthews. That's where you want to get Patrick Kane in anyways in the next couple of seasons. Arguably this year would be best to try and win a championship. A guy who's been there, done that, and sees a team that's young, sees a team that's good enough, maybe the way that it's constructed, that they could also go and try and get him another title.
Yeah, like 33 years old and he's still putting up great numbers. That's a guy you can target and say, okay, even if you have to give up some assets, he's nowhere near, as you said, close to falling off. So you're willing to make that investment. And the other thing it allows you to do is, and this is why I kind of preferred if they had gotten the deal done earlier, is that you put Patrick Kane with Austin Matthews, you move Mitch Marner down to John Tavares. Yeah. We know John Tavares was at his best when Mitch Marner was with him. That, like, you're telling me that doesn't
make season too. Even this year, like whenever Matthews did miss time or whenever they shook up the lineup and Marner ended up, or Tavares rather, was gifted Mitch Marner with him, his game always picked up for whatever reason. He just plays so much better when he's got a player like Mitch Marner with him. I don't know if it's, just because of the style that Mitch Marner plays that allows him, or if he just has a little pep in his step getting to play with an old buddy of his. I really don't understand why he is a completely different night and day type of player when he has Marner on his wing compared to when he has Nylander on his wing. It is just kind of baffling to me that he's like that staggering of a difference in production with those two players, considering they're both very quality top six producing, scoring wingers. But yeah, if you could make a deal, and you'd have to assume Nylander probably going back in any type of trade strictly because you do need to make the cap situation work, and you would probably get them to retain money as well. But I mean, if you send in Nylander, like what would the framework of a deal kind of look like if Toronto was to bring in Patrick Kane? I would think it starts with Willie, probably Erasmus Sandin, first round pick. You need to add any more, or is that like a good enough?
I actually don't think that's too far off because you're going to get Chicago to retain some salary by sending Nylander salary. You can kind of offset and tell Chicago, well, we're not going to ask you to take back all of it, like half of it, which is the maximum they can take. Because that was the first thing. Because I know a lot of people in the comment section like, oh, I'm going to add another $10 million contract. Well, no, it's not going to be the full $10 million cap. There's just no way.
But I mean, he's making what, 10-5 or 10-5? 10-5. So, I mean, I still would ask them to take half of that deal. So that'd be 5-5.
Ideal.
I still want them to take 50% of that because then that gives you that extra, I guess, would it be $1.65 million in between moving on from Nylander's deal and then 50% of Kane's deal. And a team that's really under the cap anyways, like that'll be really helpful. They are over the cap as of this moment. So, I mean, if you can make that happen, move out Nylander's contract and bring in a lesser at 50% Kane contract, already you're ahead just based on you've also opened up a little bit of wiggle room for cap space so that you don't have to have a 20-man roster. You can have 21, 22 guys be on your roster at a time. That's also beneficial.
And let's be real here. Chicago, if they were smart, they would take William Nylander, they flip him easily to another team.
Well, so that's the other thing that I wanted to get to also, because, on Twitter, everyone's saying, why would they want Nylander? They trade away DeBrincat because he didn't fit into their long-term plans. Nylander's older, maybe not even as good. Why would they want a William Nylander? Well, because he's still a very valuable player. You can flip him for the assets that Toronto doesn't have. You can get top prospects for a William Nylander. Like, try and put a framework of a three-way trade in your mind, and maybe that you could do that instead, right? Like somebody who maybe wants a Nylander, but they have prospects that Toronto doesn't want. But if you could set up a three-way trade and you trade Nylander to, I don't know, whatever team X, and you get a couple of top prospects. Well, now you got, 2 top A prospects, you've got Sandin, and you got a first-round pick for Patrick Kane, who is probably going to leave your team at the end of the year anyways. And he has a lot of leverage too. That's something that I think you also need to think about, and maybe even why it might not even cost as much as you would think for Patrick Kane. We were having this conversation before we hopped on air, because I was trying to think of a more modern example, but think back to the Jarome Iginla deal. And this is almost like, if you can think of a better example, those who are listening, than the Jarome Iginla trade for somebody who has the legacy within that organization that Patrick Kane has, and also has like full control of where they go. Let me know if there's a more modern example than Jarome Iginla. The only other one I thought of was potentially Taylor Hall, because he had a no move clause when he was with Buffalo, but I don't put him in the same class. Like, he didn't have the respect, I guess, from the organization. Didn't have the legacy within the organization. But they may want to do right by Patrick Kane, so they may not take the best, or they may not be able to take what's considered the best offer, but maybe what the best offer from the team that Kane wants to go to might be their only option as well. So if he wants to go to Toronto, they might not have to give up as much as you would think for a superstar player like that.
Yeah, because Iginla went for, I'm just looking here, it was Ben Hanowski, and a first-round pick from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
That's nothing for Jarome Iginla.
Absolutely nothing. And neither of those prospects turned into anything. And I don't think that first-round pick turned into anything. I think the first-round pick was maybe like Emile Poirier potentially ended up being that pick. They had like 3 first-rounders that year, and they all turned into busts. So whichever one they took, it didn't work out for them, because it was
Morgan Klimchuk.
Okay, Morgan Klimchuk, also brutal.
Poirier was the pick before that. So you're close.
I knew it was one of those. They took that 3 draft picks in that year. It was Monahan, who we know what happened to him, and then Poirier and Klimchuk. So, yeah, it turned out to be absolutely nothing for Jarome Iginla. Now, I think Chicago they could get a
little bit smarter about it.
Well, they could also get to a point where, think about what Masai Ujiri did with Kyle Lowry a couple of years ago with the Raptors, right? Where Lowry had all the leverage of where he wanted to go, but at the same time, Masai didn't have to trade him. He didn't want to, get bent over by another team. So ultimately, he didn't get the offers he thought he would be able to get. He didn't get the offers he thought were fair compensation for their star player. So ultimately, he said, well, you know what? I'm not going to get a fast one pulled on me. I'm just not going to trade him, and I'll just let him walk as a free agent. They ended up actually doing a sign and trade afterwards, and it worked out decently. But he ultimately said, like, hey, I'm not getting the fair value that I want for him, so we're just not going to move him. Same thing's happening with Kevin Durant right now in the Brooklyn Nets. They didn't get anywhere near the offers that they thought they were going to get, so they decided to keep him. Now, Durant has 4 more years on his contract. Patrick Kane's going into his final season, so he could walk, and they'll never see him again. So you would think you got to get something for Patrick Kane. But ultimately, they could decide to do nothing if they're not getting the proper respect, I guess, in the offers for Kane. But I think Toronto would be a really, really interesting situation for him, and definitely put this team way up in the power rankings in terms of being Stanley Cup contenders if they can add Patty Kane and really lengthen that lineup by making Mitch Marner and John Tavares a duo on the second line and then Kane and Matthews on the first line. Oh, baby, that would be a fun Maple Leaf season. But again, apparently, if there is going to be any type of deal, Kane would prefer it to be around the trade deadline. So I'm not anticipating one to happen anytime soon.